Hi everyone, welcome to the UMS Performance Playground. My name's Keith Billbik. I'm the UMS Teaching Artist of the Day and I'm a banjo player. I've been playing banjo for about 20 years. I sold them at a world famous store called Elderly Instruments nearby in Lansing, Michigan. And I also started my very own podcast dedicated just to the banjo. So this is clearly my favorite instrument. I love talking about it and I'm really happy that you're here with me to learn about them. I became interested in the banjo about 20 years ago. Now, even from the time, ever since I can remember when I was a little kid, I always loved music, and I even grew up playing the saxophone, guitar, and piano. But it wasn't until I was in college that a good friend of mine gave me a banjo, knowing that I was into music already. It wasn't a very nice banjo, it was actually kind of old and beat up, but even with that thing, I knew I loved the sound and I just had to learn how to play. Well, as I said, that was 20 years ago, and I haven't really stopped learning or playing it since. I have, however, saved up for a nicer banjo. Now, even though the banjo can be used to play a lot of different styles of music, the genre or style of music that people usually think of when they hear the banjo is called bluegrass music. When I started playing, I didn't know much about bluegrass music or who were the people who were playing bluegrass music, but I made sure that I found out that stuff and really tried to listen to all the best players that I could, and I found that that really helped me learn. I think that's a really important part of learning just about anything, is watching or listening or somehow experiencing the people who are the best at doing whatever that is that you're doing. For example, if you want to be a basketball player, you should probably watch a lot of college and professional basketball games. If you are an aspiring artist, you should visit lots of museums or maybe read a lot of good books if you want to be an author. I just think that's a really important part of learning. There are a lot of things to learn about the banjo, more than I could ever possibly tell you in this video, but we have included some Google Slides along with this lesson to help supplement this information. However, before we get started, I want to make sure I at least tell you three main things that I think are really important to know. The first thing is that the banjo is originally from Africa, and it was brought to America along with the culture of the enslaved Africans a few centuries ago. Now, their banjos would have looked a lot different than the one I'm holding. They would have been made out of a dried gourd, which is kind of like a pumpkin, and then used, this is called the head of the banjo, they used animal skin for the head of the banjos. They also would have had 3 or 4 strings made out of animal gut for the strings. So those would have looked quite different, but it is where this banjo comes from. Now my banjo, in comparison, is made up of a lot of wood and metal, which makes it actually really heavy. And I have 5 strings on mine, and they're metal strings, and rather than animal skin, this is a plastic head. This is actually the same as if you've ever seen drums. This is the same as a drum, except with strings on it. When bluegrass music was invented back in the 1940s, these changes to the modern banjo helped it project more and become a lot louder so that audiences could hear it. The banjo is a very loud instrument, much louder than a guitar. One of the first things you learn when you start playing banjo are different finger patterns to play with these 3 picks that we have. Now, each of those patterns has its own special sound that banjo players use in different ways. All of these patterns are called banjo rolls. And I like to think that we call them rolls because it kind of sounds like a train rolling down the track when you play them. The person credited with inventing this style of playing is named Earl Scruggs. Earl first performed his new style of banjo playing way back in the 1940s and went on to play professionally for about 70 years after that. A lot of people consider him the greatest banjo player of all time, and almost every bluegrass banjo player copies him in some way. In fact, his style is so important that a lot of people call bluegrass banjo Scruggs style playing, and people will probably look at you a little funny if you don't play at least a little bit like him. Of course, Earl Scruggs isn't the only great banjo player ever. There have been plenty of others over the years. One man named Bill Keith invented a different style of playing called melodic style banjo. that didn't use all the roll patterns like Earl Scruggs did, and it copied more of the sound of a fiddle. Another great player is named Bela Fleck, and he is a modern-day banjo player, and he's a real expert of the instrument. He uses the banjo to combine everything from classical to jazz to bluegrass and everything in between. He's a modern-day hero of a lot of players, including me. Another great modern group to know about is Our Native Daughters, which features 4 women banjo players, and they are exploring the roots of banjo music, including the African influences like the ones I spoke about earlier. Now I'll show you how banjo players use those roll patterns to make the songs sound really exciting. First, I'll play just the melody of a song. I think most of you will recognize it. Did you recognize that song? The best banjo players are the ones who know how to take a melody like that, add the notes from the roll patterns, and give it that exciting banjo sound. So here's how that would sound. Now here's a little something for you to practice at home, even if you don't have a banjo. I keep talking about these roll patterns that are so important to playing bluegrass banjo. Well, I'm going to teach you a couple of them. The first one, now look at your Google Slides for this, because we want to make sure that we're using these 3 fingers to start. Thumb, index, and middle. So whenever you see the letter T, that means tap with your thumb. You can tap on your desk or on your leg or whatever you have handy. So T means thumb. If you see an I, that means hit it with your index, and then middle means strike with your middle finger. So here's your very first roll pattern, and a lot of people call this a square roll. I'm not sure why they call it that, but it's just what it's called. The first one is T-I-T-M. T-I-T-M. Let's hear how that sounds on a banjo. Even though I only told you 4 different patterns, T, I, T, M, that's only 4 notes, typically what banjo players do is you just keep playing those over and over again until you either get bored of it or until you drive someone crazy and they ask you to stop. For your next roll, I'm going to teach you one called the forward reverse roll. This one's a little bit more challenging because it's actually 8 notes long instead of 4 notes like the square roll was. This is how this one goes. Thumb, index, middle, thumb, middle, index, thumb, middle. I know that's a lot to remember, so please just look at your Google Slides if you're having trouble keeping track. But here's how that sounds on the banjo. I know you don't have a banjo of your own to practice that on yet, but you can either practice with your 3 fingers tapping on your desk, or I was thinking it might be even cool to pretend that your left hand is the thumb, your right hand is the index, and your right foot is the middle. You can do the same patterns with those 3 limbs, or even make up your own patterns. Thanks a lot for joining me for the UMS Performance Playground. I had a great time telling you all about the banjo, and I hope you enjoyed learning some things. If you're interested in learning even more, check out the Google Slides and the worksheets that accompany this video. Goodbye and have a great day.